Welcome to episode 24 in our series on Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto's The Way of God, and we're still in the section, the fourth section of the book, which deals with how to serve God, and we're up to chapter 6, which is entitled The Order of the Day, and the Ramchal is going to describe various obligations that we have towards God during the day and breaks down their functions. And this is quite a long chapter, so I'm going to split this into two episodes. And in the first episode, the first half of this chapter, the Ramchal is going to describe to us the various powers that exist during night time, and through chronologically through the day. We'll go through the obligations that we have, from washing our hands in the morning, why we wash our hands, why we wear tzitzits and tefillin and the talis. That will be the subject of this episode, the first half of chapter 6. So let's begin, and the Ramchal is going to describe in the beginning of this chapter 6 the power of the forces of impurity during man's time of rest. So the Ramchal begins. The highest wisdom ordained that the night should be a time when the forces of evil have the authority to proliferate in all their vehicles and cause their offshoots in the world to move round freely. The intention was that people should remain at home, sleeping and resting until the morning. When the morning comes, authority is taken away from these forces and their offshoots, and people can once again go about their occupations until nightfall. All this is explained in a psalm in which David HaMelech exclaims to God, and I quote from Tehillim 104 verse 20, "You make darkness and it is night, and all the beasts of the forest creep forth. The sun rises, they slink away. Man then goes forth to his work and to his labour until evening." All these concepts, with all their domains and limits, originate in the fundamental roots, following the various aspects of the influences that affect man at every level. This has already been discussed in the first section. Even though night time in general is the time when these forces have authority, this is actually only true of the first half of the night. At midnight, an influence of illumination and favour emanates from God to all worlds, and authority is taken away from these forces of evil. Their offshoots are driven away from the places of human habitation, and the spiritual illumination of the day begins to be awakened. This continues until daybreak, when the appropriate influence is transmitted, renewing all existence. The fact that these forces are given authority at night and driven away by day was ordained as part of the natural order of creation. This is in addition to the authority or subjugation of evil that is a result of man's deeds. True good and evil are primarily the results of man's deeds. In order for this arrangement to be possible, however, the highest wisdom determined that the laws of nature contain a framework for the expansion of evil as well as its prevention. To achieve this, the highest wisdom decreed that a portion of the daily cycle be given over to evil, where it would have authority and proliferate so that it would be prepared to assimilate the product of man's deeds. It was also decreed that there be another portion of the daily cycle when this ability was taken away from evil, so that it be in a state of weakness where man's deeds can cause it to be subjugated. God therefore set up two concepts, namely spiritual light and darkness, which are the results of his illumination and its absence respectively, as discussed in the first section. God then divided the daily cycle amongst them, providing daytime for this light and nighttime for this darkness. The authority of these forces of evil is then given to them at night, and they are driven away by day. All this is so that they should be prepared to assimilate the products of man's deeds, as discussed earlier. When the forces of evil are given authority and proliferate in the world, the spiritual darkness of the world is likewise increased and strengthened. Therefore, even though man may be sound asleep and not involved in any evil, the corruption or tumah that is prevalent spreads over him. The degree to which it can do so depends on the amount of spiritual darkness that exists in the individual's body as a result of his materialism and evil urge, or yetzer hara. Besides this, it is also part of the general order that when a person sleeps, the higher portions of his soul remove themselves from him, as discussed previously. He therefore experiences a taste of death while he sleeps, and our sages therefore teach us that sleep is 1/60th of death. As a result of the absence of the purifying light of the neshama part of the soul, spiritual darkness becomes all the more potent in man's body. The body is therefore much more open for this corruption to spread over it. This is the concept of the noxious spirit that rests on a person's hands when he wakes up in the morning, as our sages teach us. The reason that it rests on the hands and nowhere else is the result of the limits that the highest wisdom determined for it. According to man's state in this world, this is the appropriate degree that this unclean spirit should affect him, no more and no less. So the Ramchal describing these metaphysical elements that profligates through the evening and night time, and it seems like the way that to rid yourself of this kind of noxious spirit that may have attached itself to you during the night is when we wake up in the morning and we wash nagel vasa, or this hand washing. So the Ramchal describes it now, and he continues. The highest wisdom prepared a procedure for man whereby each morning he can strive to elevate himself from his lowly nighttime state and illuminate his spiritual darkness. All of this is included in the regulations that were ordained both in words and in deed when man wakes up in the morning. The first act is the washing of one's hands. It is the hands that are defiled and upon which the noxious spirits rest, and it is therefore necessary to purify them and drive away this evil. God ordained that this noxious spirit should be driven away through proper washing, as our sages taught us, namely by one's pouring water over his hands 3 times alternately. Through this, man's entire body is also purified, just as it was all defiled as a result of the noxious spirit that pervaded his hands. Man is a microcosm, and therefore this concept also includes a rectification of creation as a whole. Through the ritual of washing one's hands, the world is also purified of its nighttime corruption and brought out of its spiritual darkness. Related to this is the cleansing of one's body by attending the lavatory. Through all these things, man is purified and prepared to approach his Creator. This is then followed by the two observances, each of which is included amongst the 613 commandments of the Torah. These 2 observances are the tzitzits, or the tassels on the 4-cornered garment, and tefillin, which together with prayer complete the daily service. We will first explain their own particular significance, and then go into the role they play in the rectification of the daily order. The significance of tzitzits stems from the fact that God desired that Israel be sanctified through everything associated with them. He therefore gave them commandments relating to all times and circumstances, so that everything should serve to rectify them. Among the things associated with man is the clothing that he wears. In order that this also be rectified with holiness, God commanded that tzitzits be placed on the corners of all 4-sided garments, thus consecrating them with a degree of holiness. There was also a deeper concept included in this commandment. man must wear God's insignia, very much as a vassal wears the insignia of his master. This is part of accepting God's yoke and subjugating oneself to him. Man was given the task of rectifying all creation, as discussed in the first section. In maintaining all things in the state desired by God, man is serving God and doing his work. This is accomplished through man's actions, based on the Torah and the commandments that he was given. All of this, however, is based on the fact that man is God's servant and was therefore given the task of rectifying all creation. It is for this reason alone that his deeds can have such an effect, and he can thus actually accomplish this. The fact that man has this responsibility is called God's yoke, and it is very much like the yoke that a master places on his slave. Man's ability to rectify creation is strengthened by certain aspects of this yoke, as determined by God. Among these aspects is the distinction and insignia which we wear as the tzitzits. Besides the fact that one must constantly wear tzitzits, our sages have associated it with the morning prayer in particular. They thus ordained that a person must wear a talis containing tzitzit fringes during the morning prayers. This is another aspect of the acceptance of God's yoke, and it has the power to help one partake of God's work, which is the rectification of the universe as discussed previously. Since the morning service is meant to accomplish this, its concept is thus enhanced by the commandment of tzitzit. Now the Ramchal is going to describe the second element of clothing that we must wear, the tefillin, which we must don every morning. And the Ramchal describes it as a kind of crown for a Jew to wear that somehow connects with God's holiness in a metaphysical manner. So the Ramchal continues. The idea of tefillin is much loftier than that of tzitzit. Through tefillin, God gave Jews the power to draw down upon themselves an extension of God's holiness itself and crown themselves with it, causing one's whole being, body and soul to come under a great light, bringing tremendous rectification. The Torah thus says in Deuteronomy 28 verse 10, "All the nations of the earth shall see that God's name is called upon you," referring to the result when Israel fulfills the commandment of tefillin in all its details. There are two main parts of the human body where the soul, or neshama, strongly manifests itself. These are the heart and the brain. God therefore commanded that we first transmit this light to the brain through the tefillin worn on the head. The brain and the soul, the neshama, manifests in it are thus rectified. This rectification is then extended to the heart through the tefillin that are worn on the arm in proximity to the heart. The entire man, in his every aspect, is thus included in this transmission of holiness, and is engulfed and greatly sanctified by it. The various concepts and details associated with this commandment are all necessary to complete all the elements of this rectification as they relate to the various aspects of man himself. We are commanded to don this crown, the crown of tefillin, every day of the year, except for on holy days, which in themselves serve as an insignia for Israel, and on their own crown the Jew with an aura, without the Jew having to do so himself. On days which are not holy days, it is impossible to attain such an aura without wearing tefillin, and the aura on non-holy days, even with tefillin on, is much smaller than that attained on holy days. These matters are all determined, their conditions fixed and measured by the highest wisdom, which decides what is most appropriate. After a Jew has put on tzitzit and tefillin, which serve as insignias, he is ready for the morning prayer service, instituted for the sake of other necessary rectifications. Indeed, the general purpose of the prayer service is these rectifications, which affect all of creation. All universes are to be raised to a state in which they are capable of receiving the highest sustenance, which is then transmitted to them by God according to their needs. So we're going to pause there. This is about halfway through chapter 6, and we have now dealt with, the Ramchal has beautifully described the various stages that upon awakening that we must, are the procedures we must follow. And we are almost putting on a uniform as God's soldiers. We're donning our uniform. And the next episode is going to describe the prayer services and the different elements and different parts of the service and what they mean. So that's fascinating. Sometimes we kind of more out of... we put our tefillin on and we wear our talis without perhaps, keeping in mind what we are actually doing. And again, like I've always said, sometimes when you add the correct mindset to the action, it supercharges the act. And so having these thoughts in mind about how the Ramchal earlier described how to dispel any noxious spirits that may rest on us during the night by washing our hands ritually, by wearing tzitzits and the talis, and very importantly the tefillin. We are really kind of supercharging our souls and rectifying the universe. Perhaps we don't realize the reach of our actions. And the Ramchal is beautifully describing them here. So in the next episode, we're going to deal with the second half of this, the 6th chapter.